With the cipher of which he had the secret, he assigned to each letter its true value. He read, he verified the sense of those lines, unintelligible to all but him, and then he smiled, and a most unpleasant smile it was. Then he murmured some phrases in an undertone which none in the solitude of the Peruvian forests could hear, and which no one, had he been anywhere else, would have heard. "Yes," said he at length, "here are 100 lines very neatly written, which, for some one that I know, have an importance that is undoubted. That somebody is rich. It is a question of life or death for him, and looked at in every way it will cost him something." And scrutinizing the paper with greedy eyes, "At a conto only for each word of this last sentence, it will amount to a considerable sum, and it is this sentence which fixes the price. It sums up the entire document. It gives their true names to true personages. But before trying to understand it, I ought to begin by counting the number of words it contains, and even when this is done, its true meaning may be missed." In saying this, Torres began to count mentally. "There are 58 words, and that makes 58 contos. With nothing but that one could live in Brazil, in America, wherever one wished, and even live without doing anything. And what would it be, then, if all the words of this document were paid for at the same price? It would be necessary to count by hundreds of contos. Ah, there is quite a fortune here for me to realize if I am not the greatest of duffers." It seemed as though the hands of Torres felt the enormous sum, and were already closing over the rolls of gold. Suddenly his thoughts took another turn. "At length," he cried, "I see land, and I do not regret the voyage which has led me from the coast of the Atlantic to the upper Amazon. But this man may quit America and go beyond the seas, and then how can I touch him? But no, he is there, and if I climb to the top of this tree I can see the roof under which he lives with his family." Then, seizing the paper and shaking it with terrible meaning, "Before tomorrow I will be in his presence. Before tomorrow he will know that his honor and his life are contained in these lines, and when he wishes to see the cipher which permits him to read them, he will pay for it. He will pay, if I wish it, with all his fortune, as he ought to pay with all his blood. Ah, my worthy comrade, who gave me the cipher, who told me where I could find his old colleague, and the name under which he has been hiding himself for so many years, hardly suspects that he has made my fortune." For the last time Torres glanced over the yellow paper, and then, after carefully folding it, put it away into a little copper box which he used for a purse. This box was about as big as a cigar case, and if what was in it was all Torres possessed, he would nowhere have been considered a wealthy man. He had a few of all the coins of the neighboring states, 10 double condors in gold of the United States of Colombia, worth about 100 francs, Brazilian reais, worth about as much, golden sols of Peru, worth, say, double, some Chilean escudos, worth 50 francs or more, and some smaller coins, but the lot would not amount to more than 500 francs, and Torres would have been somewhat embarrassed had he been asked how or where he had got them. One thing was certain, that for some months after having suddenly abandoned the trade of the slave hunter, which he carried on in the province of Para, Torres had ascended the basin of the Amazon, crossed the Brazilian frontier, and come into Peruvian territory. To such a man the necessities of life were but few. Expenses he had none, nothing for his lodging, nothing for his clothes. The forest provided his food, which in the backwoods cost him naught. A few reais were enough for his tobacco, which he bought at the mission stations or in the villages, and for a trifle more he filled his flask with liquor. With little he could go far. When he had pushed the paper into the metal box of which the lid shut tightly with a snap, Torres, instead of putting it into the pocket of his undervest, thought to be extra careful, and placed it near him in a hollow of a root of the tree beneath which he was sitting. This proceeding, as it turned out, might have cost him dear. It was very warm, the air was oppressive, If the church of the nearest village had possessed a clock, the clock would have struck 2, and, coming with the wind, Torres would have heard it, for it was not more than a couple of miles off. But he cared not as to time. Accustomed to regulate his proceedings by the height of the sun, calculated with more or less accuracy, he could scarcely be supposed to conduct himself with military precision. He breakfasted or dined when he pleased, or when he could. He slept when and where sleep overtook him. If his table was not always spread, his bed was always ready at the foot of some tree in the open forest, and in other respects Torres was not difficult to please. He had travelled during most of the morning, and having already eaten a little, he began to feel the want of a snooze. 2 or 3 hours' rest would, he thought, put him in a state to continue his road, and so he laid himself down on the grass as comfortably as he could, and waited for sleep beneath the ironwood tree. Torres was not one of those people who drop off to sleep without certain preliminaries. He was in the habit of drinking a drop or two of strong liquor, and of then smoking a pipe. The spirits, he said, overexcited the brain, and the tobacco smoke agreeably mingled with the general haziness of his reverie. Torres commenced, then, by applying to his lips a flask which he carried at his side. It contained the liquor generally known under the name of chica in Peru, and more particularly under that of caisuma in the upper Amazon, to which fermented distillation of the root of the sweet manioc the captain had added a good dose of tafia, or native rum. When Torres had drunk a little of this mixture, he shook the flask, and discovered, not without regret, that it was nearly empty. "Must get some more," he said very quietly. Then, taking out a short wooden pipe, he filled it with the coarse and bitter tobacco of Brazil, of which the leaves belonged to that old petum introduced into France by Nicot, to whom we owe the popularization of the most productive and widespread of the Solanaceae. This native tobacco had little in common with the fine qualities of our present manufacturers, but Torres was not more difficult to please in this manner than in others, and so, having filled his pipe, he struck a match and applied the flame to a piece of that stick substance which is the secretion of certain of the Hymenoptera, and is known as ants amadou. With the amadou he lighted up, and after about a dozen whiffs his eyes closed, his pipe escaped from his fingers, and he fell asleep. End of Chapter 1. A Captain of the Woods. Recording by Scott Robbins.